It was a sunny afternoon in Los Angeles, the heat reflecting off the asphalt, and the dazzling shine of luxury store windows mesmerized passers-by. On Rodeo Drive, the iconic avenue where only the wealthiest shopped, exotic cars paraded like jewels on display, and customers entered and exited the boutiques, carrying designer bags in their hands. Amid this scene of luxury and ostentation, a man of simple appearance walked slowly, observing the surroundings with curiosity. He wore a worn leather jacket, black jeans, and well-used boots. His long, messy hair gave him a disheveled air, and his days-old beard made him seem like someone who didn't belong in this place. No one seemed to notice his presence. Keanu Reeves was known worldwide, but his simplicity made him almost invisible to those who measured a person's worth by their external appearance. He didn't have bodyguards or an entourage, didn't wear designer clothes, nor did he sport an expensive watch on his wrist. For most people on Rodeo Drive, he was just an ordinary man. He decided to enter a luxury car dealership that had caught his eye. Large windows reflected the city, and inside, exclusive models from Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Aston Martin gleamed under the store's warm light. An air of sophistication hung in the atmosphere. Upon entering, a receptionist glanced at him briefly and forced a smile, but she didn't bother to greet him warmly. Unlike other customers who entered with confidence and anticipation, Keanu simply looked around without hurrying. It was then that a man in a sharp suit approached him, his expression a mixture of skepticism and disdain. He was Richard Collins, the sales manager, known for his ability to close deals with the most exclusive clientele and for his arrogant attitude toward those who didn't seem up to the standards of his selective establishment. "Good afternoon, sir," Richard said in a rehearsed tone, not hiding his scrutinizing glance. "Can I help you with anything?" Keanu smiled faintly and looked at the red Ferrari in front of him. "It's an impressive model," he said, with genuine admiration. The manager nodded condescendingly and looked Keanu up and down. He didn't seem like a potential customer. "Yes, it is. This particular model costs more than $300,000, he stated with a smirk. "It's not a car that just anyone can afford." Keanu continued to gaze at the car with interest, unaffected by Richard's tone. "And this one?" he asked, pointing at a black Aston Martin, ignoring the manager's evident attempt to discourage him. Richard let out a short laugh, crossed his arms, and exhaled a sigh of feigned patience. "Sir, perhaps you'd be better off visiting a dealership more within your budget. We have clients with scheduled appointments, and—" Before he could finish his sentence, another employee rushed toward him, pale-faced and wide-eyed. "Mr. Collins," the young man whispered, trying to disguise his urgency. "It's Keanu Reeves." The manager spun around, and his expression morphed into a mixture of surprise and horror. The silence in the dealership became palpable. Richard Collins felt a knot in his throat as he processed the information. Keanu Reeves. Not only a famous actor, but a globally admired icon for his humility and generosity. The tension in the air grew suffocating. Richard tried to compose himself and immediately changed his tone, adopting a more servile attitude. "Mr. Reeves, our apologies for the misunderstanding. I didn't recognize you. It's an honor to have you here." Keanu looked at him calmly, showing neither anger nor satisfaction. On his face was only serenity. "It's no problem," he said in a calm but firm voice. "I was just looking at the cars." Desperate to fix the situation, Richard made an exaggerated gesture toward the more exclusive models. "Of course, take all the time you need. If you'd like, we can arrange a test drive of any model you're interested in." The other employees watched the scene uncomfortably. They knew the manager had made a mistake, and now he was trying to salvage the situation. Keanu Reeves, maintaining his relaxed demeanor, looked directly at Richard and gave him a half-smile. "It's curious," he remarked thoughtfully, "how a person's perception changes depending on what we think we know about them. Just a few minutes ago, you didn't seem so welcoming here." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. He opened his mouth to respond, but couldn't find the right words. Keanu Reeves didn't raise his voice, didn't cause a scene, didn't demand an apology. But his words, full of meaning, resonated in the air with much more weight than any complaint. Without saying another word, he turned and walked toward the exit with the same calm with which he had entered. But just before crossing the door, he stopped, and without turning around, said loudly, "Fortunately, cars aren't the only thing that defines a person's worth. I hope you remember that." And with those words, Keanu Reeves left the dealership, leaving behind absolute silence and a manager who had just received the lesson of his life. Richard Collins was frozen in place. Never before had he felt such shame. His employees stared at him in silence, some with reproach, others with disbelief. They knew what had just happened would mark a before and after in the reputation of the dealership. The young man who had identified Keanu Reeves, a salesman named David, broke the silence. "Mr. Collins, what do we do now?" Richard swallowed hard and looked toward the door through which Keanu had exited. For the first time in a long while, he didn't have an immediate answer. "Call our public relations team," he ordered in a tense voice. "If this gets to the press, we're done for." But David didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at him seriously. "I don't think Keanu is the kind of person to expose something like this," he said firmly. "But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about it." Richard frowned. He hated to admit it, but the young man was right. Meanwhile, on the sidewalk, Keanu Reeves walked calmly, enjoying the light breeze of the afternoon. His mind was still occupied with the recent events, particularly his encounter with Richard Collins. There was something that had stayed with him, something beyond the conversation or the words exchanged. In his life, Keanu had learned that the most important moments weren't always those that seemed obvious. Often, the most profound ones were those that came unexpectedly, where there was no intention to teach a lesson, but rather to simply witness a change happening naturally. That's how he felt after his conversation with Richard. It wasn't just an encounter, but the beginning of a change that would affect more people than he imagined. Keanu often reflected on how people, especially those who achieve fame or material success, lose touch with what's essential. It wasn't about having money or recognition. It was about knowing how to treat others, how to live an authentic life without getting lost in superficiality. On his journey, Keanu had managed to find balance, but he knew not everyone had the opportunity or knowledge to do so. That's why, in some way, this encounter with Richard had marked him, because he felt that Richard was beginning to understand what truly mattered in life. Meanwhile, Richard was going through an internal transformation. After that afternoon at the cafe, he had reflected deeply on his actions and how he had lived up until now. Despite his professional success, he had always been concerned with appearances, with what society thought of him. His encounter with Keanu had been like a mirror that showed him how far he was from life's true essence. That simple man, without ostentation but with deep wisdom, had taught him that a person's true worth wasn't measured by their possessions or the image they projected, but by who they were on the inside. Richard, although initially reluctant, had begun to apply small changes in his daily life. He spoke more sincerely, treated people with more respect, and, above all, was shedding the facade of arrogance he had built over the years. He knew that this process wouldn't be easy, but at least he had started. His first concrete action was to donate a significant portion of his earnings to a foundation that helped children in vulnerable situations. Although he initially did it out of guilt, he soon discovered that the satisfaction he gained from the selfless act couldn't compare to the superficial satisfaction his material achievements gave him. Keanu Reeves walked calmly down Rodeo Drive, his worn leather jacket moving gently with the warm afternoon breeze. Although the incident at the luxury car dealership still lingered in his mind, he felt no anger, not even frustration. It had been a lesson, both for himself and for Richard Collins and the other employees who had witnessed the encounter. For Keanu, experiences like that were nothing new. He had spent much of his life being judged by his appearance, his fame, and the superficial value the world seemed to assign to people. As he walked, his gaze wandered to the storefronts of the luxury shops. The shine of the glass and the displayed products reminded him of the fleeting nature of the things society valued so highly: money, status, appearances. Yet, something within him whispered that these things were not what truly defined a person's worth. His life had been filled with encounters with people who, through their humility and generosity, had shown him the true meaning of wealth. He thought about the years he had spent in the film industry, where fame came with constant scrutiny and public judgment. Often, he was considered an unattainable figure, but Keanu had never felt comfortable on that pedestal. He had always been more than a movie star. People saw him on red carpets and movie screens, but few knew the true nature of the man behind the persona. Those who had approached him with an open mind, without expectations, had discovered a common man with his own struggles and triumphs. As he continued his stroll, Keanu wondered if Richard Collins, the sales manager at the dealership, had learned anything from that brief encounter. He knew that people often needed time to reflect, to realize that appearances did not define a person's value. Perhaps Richard would come to understand that what truly mattered was how we treated others, regardless of how rich or powerful they might seem. He decided not to dwell on it. Life had taught him that lessons were not always delivered with fanfare or immediate recognition. Sometimes, the deepest lessons came subtly, over time. That was what mattered most: internal change, personal growth, the evolution toward becoming a more aware and compassionate being. As he walked on, he realized that his mind had calmed. He no longer felt the need to hold on to resentment or negative experiences. Life was full of fleeting moments, and anger only occupied space in a heart that preferred peace. He decided that when he returned home that evening, he would take a moment to reflect on everything that had happened in the last few hours. The incident at the dealership had given him more than a lesson in humility. It had also reminded him of the importance of being authentic, of not being swayed by others' expectations, and of how sometimes the most ordinary people had much more to offer than those clinging to superficiality. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Keanu found a bench in a small nearby park and sat down, letting the gentle breeze caress his face. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Around him, the city's bustle continued, but he was at peace. He had managed to find tranquility amid the chaos, something many people overlooked in their race to achieve success and the approval of others. The following day, the luxury car dealership was still buzzing with talk about the previous incident. Richard Collins, the manager, had spent the entire night reflecting on what had transpired. Despite his pride, he couldn't ignore the lesson Keanu had imparted. Initially, he tried to downplay the encounter, but as the day wore on, he couldn't stop thinking about how wrong his behavior had been. He had judged Keanu solely by his appearance, assuming that a man dressed simply couldn't afford a luxury car, that someone without a bodyguard or entourage wasn't worthy of his attention. But, as he learned that afternoon, none of those assumptions were true. Keanu had embodied humility and authenticity, qualities Richard, despite his professional success, had failed to appreciate. Richard was in his office, gazing out the window, when David, the young salesperson who had recognized Keanu, entered with a serious expression. "Mr. Collins," David began, "we've reviewed social media. No one has publicized the incident. But there's something I think we should consider." Richard turned toward him, concerned about what David might say. "What is it?" he asked, noticing David's uncharacteristically somber demeanor. David took a deep breath before speaking. "I believe if Keanu doesn't bring up what happened, it's because he isn't looking for revenge. But what he did wasn't just to teach us something. It was an opportunity for all of us to reflect on how we treat others. Maybe we should do something to show we've understood the message." Richard frowned, unsure of what David was suggesting. "What do you propose?" David offered a faint smile, recognizing his boss's confusion. "A donation to a charity that supports vulnerable youth. Something that reflects the kind of lesson Keanu shared with us. Not in his name, but ours. It's a way to demonstrate that we understand the importance of treating everyone with dignity, regardless of their status or appearance." Richard fell silent, pondering David's words. Eventually, he nodded slowly. "You're right. This is the time to change how we see things. Let's do it." That same afternoon, Richard announced the decision to the staff. They agreed to make a significant donation to an organization supporting at-risk youth. Instead of publicizing the gesture as corporate generosity, they chose to do it discreetly. It wasn't about damage control, but about genuine transformation. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves continued his life with the same calm demeanor that had always defined him. He didn't expect his act of humility to change the world, but he knew that even if it positively impacted just one person, it had been worth it. Sometimes, the biggest changes start with the simplest actions, and Keanu understood that. Without holding grudges or needing explanations, he found peace in doing what was right. As days passed, the incident at the luxury car dealership faded from the collective memory of the city. For Keanu Reeves, it was merely another chapter in a long series of life lessons about ego and perception. Though the experience left him with a sense of inner satisfaction, Keanu was never one to seek attention or recognition for his actions. However, for Richard Collins and his employees, the encounter's impact lingered, casting a shadow over their daily lives. Richard had committed to change, to align his actions with the self-reflection spurred by his embarrassing mistake. The charitable donation had been his first step toward redemption. It wasn't about saving face, but genuinely altering his perspective on the value of people beyond material possessions. Yet, the real challenge wasn't a single altruistic act. It was sustaining that internal transformation over time. One Tuesday afternoon, as the sun began to set and Los Angeles bathed in golden light, Keanu decided to visit a small cafe near Venice Beach. Far from the hustle and bustle of Rodeo Drive, it was one of his favorite spots, a quiet retreat where he could sit and watch life unfold. The beach, full of tourists and locals enjoying the sea and sun, contrasted sharply with the cafe's tranquil ambience. As Keanu entered, the gentle chime of the doorbell sounded, and he headed to his usual corner, a cozy spot by the window offering a serene view of the ocean. The barista, a middle-aged man with a gray beard and a genuine smile, greeted him without surprise, as he always did. Keanu wasn't a regular, but his calm and kind demeanor made him feel welcome everywhere. "Good afternoon, Keanu," the barista said, his tone neither overly enthusiastic nor indifferent but marked by genuine respect. "The usual." Keanu gave a small smile and nodded. "Yes, please. A black coffee and one of your oatmeal cookies." The barista nodded and headed to the counter. Keanu settled into his chair, letting the ocean breeze brush against his face as he watched the waves gently lap the shore. He loved this place because it allowed him to disconnect from the artificial spotlight of fame. Here, he wasn't Keanu Reeves, the famous actor. He was simply a man enjoying coffee and a good view. But that afternoon held an unexpected surprise. While gazing at the horizon, Keanu spotted a familiar figure walking toward the cafe. It was Richard Collins, the luxury car dealership manager, dressed in his usual dark suit and tie, which seemed out of place in the cafe's relaxed atmosphere. Keanu recognized him immediately, and although he wasn't particularly concerned, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought Richard to such a distant and unassuming location. Richard entered the cafe and headed straight for the counter, unaware of Keanu sitting in the corner. The barista, however, noticed him and, before Richard could place his order, gestured subtly toward Keanu's table. "I think someone's waiting for you, Mr. Collins," the barista said with a knowing smile. Richard turned, startled to see Keanu. For a moment, awkwardness hung in the air, but Richard took a deep breath and approached Keanu's table. His steps were firm, but his eyes betrayed a mix of doubt and unease. "Keanu," Richard began, his tone a blend of respect and nervousness. "I didn't expect to see you here." Keanu looked up slowly, his characteristic warmth softening the moment. Despite their tense first encounter, Keanu bore no ill will. Life had taught him not to cling to uncomfortable moments. Life has curious ways of bringing people together, doesn't it? Keanu replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit down. No need to stand." Richard hesitated but eventually sat, unsure of what to say. For a few moments, they both remained silent, watching the waves come and go. It was clear Richard wanted to speak, but words seemed insufficient for the complexity of what had transpired. "I want to thank you again for what you did," Richard began, only to be interrupted by Keanu. "There's no need," Keanu said gently. "It's in the past, Richard. You don't have to apologize anymore. Life's lessons don't always come in ways we understand right away, but when they resonate, they change us." Richard nodded, though guilt still weighed on him. He knew Keanu was right. It wasn't about the apology, but about how he applied the lesson in his daily life. "How do you do it?" Richard finally asked, looking at Keanu with genuine curiosity. "How do you stay so at peace?" Keanu leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "Peace isn't something you find outside yourself, Richard. It comes when you let go of what you can't control and stop judging others based on what they have or seem to be. I'm no different from you. I just try to remember that what matters isn't fame or money but what we do for others." Richard fell silent, absorbing Keanu's words. Though he wanted to respond with something profound, he realized that sometimes the truth required no elaboration. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in warm hues, the two men sat quietly, sharing an unspoken understanding. Their worlds were vastly different, but in that moment, they were united by a simple yet powerful truth. Living with integrity and authenticity mattered more than anything else. For Keanu, the encounter reaffirmed what he already knew, that a single genuine act could plant a seed of reflection. For Richard, it marked the start of a journey toward becoming a better version of himself. The morning light filtered through the curtains of Keanu Reeves' studio, a space that, despite being filled with mementos of his career and personal achievements, always maintained an atmosphere of tranquility and simplicity. As he prepared to leave, his mind continued to dwell on the recent events, especially his encounter with Richard Collins. There was something that stayed with him, something beyond the conversation or the words exchanged. In his life, Keanu had learned that the most important moments weren't always those that seemed obvious. Often, the most profound ones were those that came unexpectedly, where there was no intention to teach a lesson, but simply to witness a change happening naturally. That's how he felt after his conversation with Richard. It wasn't just an encounter, but the beginning of a change that would affect more people than he imagined. Keanu often found himself reflecting on how people, especially those who achieve fame or material success, lose touch with what's truly important. It wasn't about having money or recognition. It was about knowing how to treat others, how to live an authentic life without getting lost in superficiality. On his journey, Keanu had managed to find balance, but he knew not everyone had the opportunity or knowledge to do so. That's why, in some way, this encounter with Richard had marked him, because he felt Richard was beginning to understand what truly mattered in life. Meanwhile, Richard had been going through a process of internal change. After that afternoon at the cafe, he had reflected deeply on his actions and how he had lived up until now. Despite his professional success, he had always been concerned with appearances, with what society thought of him. His encounter with Keanu had been like a mirror that showed him how far he was from life's true essence. That simple man, without ostentation but with profound wisdom, had taught him that a person's true worth wasn't measured by their possessions or the image they projected, but by who they were inside. Richard, although reluctant at first, had begun to apply small changes in his daily life. He spoke more sincerely, treated people with more respect, and, above all, was shedding the facade of arrogance he had built over the years. He knew this process wouldn't be easy, but at least he had started. His first concrete action had been to donate a significant portion of his earnings to a foundation that helped children in vulnerable situations. Although at first, he did it out of guilt, he soon realized that the satisfaction from this selfless act was more profound than any superficial pleasure his material achievements could provide. Days later, Keanu attended another event, a charity gathering. Richard was also present. This time, he wasn't the arrogant dealership manager, but a man much more relaxed, open, and with a much warmer presence. Though the two hadn't spoken much since their meeting at the cafe, Keanu noticed the change in him, and it made him feel a deep satisfaction that words couldn't express. Richard approached Keanu with a genuine smile, no longer the imposing figure of before. "Keanu, I didn't expect to see you here," Richard said, with a softer, more friendly tone. "The truth is, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and while I'm still on the journey, I wanted to thank you." Keanu looked at him with his usual calm and serenity. He didn't need empty words or exaggerated gestures. Richard's gratitude was evident, and Keanu valued the change in him more than any compliment. "Richard, you don't have to thank me," Keanu said softly. "Life gives us opportunities to learn and grow, and it seems like you're on the right path. That's what really matters." Richard nodded, feeling a deeper connection with Keanu than before. This wasn't just about a relationship between two men who only knew each other through their social status. It was a genuine appreciation for the change they were both experiencing. The conversation continued for a long while, with them sharing stories of their lives, reflecting on their decisions, and what it really meant to be happy. Richard admitted to Keanu that, despite having many moments of success, he had never truly felt satisfaction until he started seeing the world from a different perspective, without obsessing over material things. "I feel like I'm starting to understand what it means to be truly happy, Keanu," Richard said with a humble smile. "Sometimes I think I've wasted so many years chasing things that didn't matter." Keanu smiled slightly. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that, but he always listened with humility. He had learned not to judge, to listen, and to let people come to their own conclusions. "It's never too late, Richard," Keanu said. "The important thing is that you know now. Change doesn't have an expiration date." From that moment on, the two men continued their journey, each with their own mission in life, but knowing that the impact they could have on the world was in how they treated others. In that connection, in that simplicity, was where true greatness resided. Time passed, and Richard continued on his journey of personal growth. Keanu, for his part, continued with his usual life, but with a renewed sense of satisfaction. Though he never sought to be the center of attention, he knew that his actions, words, and example left an imprint that sometimes changed people's lives in invisible ways. Sometimes, the most profound lessons aren't delivered through grand speeches or dramatic gestures, but in simple moments, like a conversation between two men in a cafe by the sea. Humility, authenticity, and respectful treatment of others are the foundations of a well-lived life, and those principles are priceless. And though Keanu would never seek recognition for his good deeds, life had taught him that a person's true measure was found in their ability